Hello, everyone. I began this series last week by offering some of my thoughts on Wes Craven's notorious low-budget shocker, The Last House on the Left. This week, I'm going to be discussing a favorite film of mine that I hadn't seen for about 25 years. Thanks to the current academic strike at Ontario's colleges, I have some time on my hands these days, so I finally caught up with a film that has been a favorite of mine since I first saw it about 34 years ago. That film is Fred Zinnemann's A Man for All Seasons, released in 1966, starring Paul Scofield, with a screenplay written by Robert Bolt based on his own play. In many ways, A Man for All Seasons seems to come from a completely different universe than The Last House on the Left. Craven's film is a low-budget exploitation film, whereas Zinnemann's is a big-budget costume drama. Craven's film is his first feature film, whereas Zinnemann's career had been well established as the director of High Noon and From Here to Eternity. Craven's film featured unknown and amateur actors, whereas Zinnemann's film featured some of the most respected actors of the 20th century, including Orson Welles, considered to be the United States' greatest film and theater actor-director, Paul Scofield, considered by many to be the 20th century's greatest Shakespearean actor, Robert Shaw, who, in his pre-Jaws days, was a highly respected actor and playwright, Wendy Hiller, who had been a star of the British stage and screen for several decades, Leo McKern, a highly respected actor who would later become known as Rumpole of the Bailey, and in one of his first screen appearances, John Hurt. Other actors rounding out the cast who would continue on to important acting careers are Corbin Redgrave and Susanna York. Finally, Craven wrote his script directly for his film and had not written a feature-length film before, whereas Bolt adapted his own highly successful play for the film and was well known as the screenwriter of Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. Another surprising divergence between the two films is in the emphases of their presentations. Craven's film emphasizes violent action. The violent humiliation and murders of Phyllis and Mary lead to the violent revenge of Mary's parents on the gang of degenerates. Bolt's film, surprisingly, emphasizes ideas rather than actions. This is surprising because Bolt, as the screenwriter for the two previously mentioned David Lean-directed spectacles, made sure that action-packed battle sequences were included in both Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. Most of A Man for All Seasons, however, is dramatized around conversations between a small number of characters, usually between 2 and 4, with the notable exception being the climactic courtroom scene. Zinnemann's visual sense, however, works harmoniously with Bolt's literate and complex screenplay. For instance, in a crucial early scene, Will Roper tells Thomas More that he would strike down every law in England in order to defeat the devil. More's reply is as follows: "Oh, and when the last law was down, and the devil turned round on you, where would you hide, Roper, the laws all being flat? This country is planted thick with laws, from coast to coast, man's laws, not God's, and if you cut them down, and you're just the man to do it, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? Yes, I'd give the devil benefit of law for my own safety's sake." Notice how Bolt's screenplay uses the metaphor of wind to dramatize the effects of lawlessness. Later in the film, when Meg meets Moore and warns him about the act of succession, the scene is staged outdoors in a heavy wind. The visual imagery at this point in the film references the verbal imagery given earlier in the film. The laws have indeed been knocked flat, and Moore must now attempt to stand in the winds that are now blowing. Craven has stated in interviews that, when writing screenplays and making films, he deliberately uses the family as a microcosm of society. Any political statement that is found in his films is not directly made, but usually must be extrapolated from the dynamics that Craven uses to present his families. For instance, The Last House on the Left presents his families as headed by two alpha males, and leaves it to us as the audience to ponder on the political implications of his presentation. In Zinnemann's film, the political is foregrounded and intertwined with the personal. Henry's vendetta against More is presented as instigated by More's refusal to support Henry's divorce of Catherine of Aragon, and cemented by Moore's failure to attend Henry's wedding to Anne Boleyn. The way in which Bolt and Zinnemann dramatize this scene makes it impossible to interpret Henry's motive for his persecution of Moore as being anything but feeling personally insulted and betrayed at what he perceives as the loss of Moore's friendship. Henry is depicted as thinking that he sees Moore at the wedding and rushes towards his friend, calling his name and beaming. His expression drops to a scowl when he sees that he is mistaken and Moore has not attended the wedding. Henry is also presented as a dominant alpha male in this film. When we first see him, he jumps to shore from his state boat and dirties his leggings. His entourage hushes to see his reaction. Henry studies them, laughs, and in relief, everyone in the entourage bursts out laughing. Henry is clearly aware that he controls the situation and feels empowered by making it obvious that he controls the situation. Like Craven's film, A Man for All Seasons explores the effects of dominant alpha male behavior. Zinnemann and Bolt, however, extend the presentation from the personal dimension to the political dimension. When talking with Moore in the garden, Henry states, "There are those like Norfolk who follow me because I wear the crown, and those like Master Cromwell who follow me because they are jackals with sharp teeth and I'm their tiger. There's a mass that follows me because it follows anything that moves, and then there's you." Bolt here is describing the behavior of people in polities that are governed by dominant alpha males. Norfolk, Cromwell, Rich, and Moore present four possible responses to the situation. Norfolk, himself a duke, will follow the king's agenda even though he privately disagrees with it, out of class obligation and identification with the monarch. When we are first introduced to Norfolk, he is very concerned with class, referring to Wolsey as a butcher's son, and, during the court of inquiry into Thomas's behavior, encourages Thomas to take the oath out of fellowship with the names of the people who are on the list. Cromwell represents the response of the professional organizational employee to the demands of the leader. He has been told what the agenda is, and he will find any means to make it happen. Rich represents a pure opportunist. Although it can be argued that Rich exemplifies the same pragmatism as Cromwell, witness Cromwell's description of himself as an administrator, Rich is set apart by his singular lack of empathy and remorse for what he is doing to his former friend. Finally, Moore represents the person of ideals and conscience who will not betray their own integrity and values, even when doing so brings about a catastrophic loss. It is Wolsey who first tells Moore, early in the film, that if it wasn't for his horrible moral squint, he could have been a statesman. From the beginning, we are aware that the polity presented in this film sees a conscience and a sense of morality as a liability. Zinnemann seems to be revisiting a favorite theme of his in A Man for All Seasons, that of the individual whose moral sense initially brings them into conflict with society and, ultimately, to ostracization. Will Kane, in High Noon, insists on meeting his responsibilities as sheriff, despite both passive resistance from the other townspeople in their refusal to help him, and active resistance in the form of one of the villagers attempting to knock him unconscious and send him out of town on a wagon. Pruitt, in From Here to Eternity, faces harassment and violence due to his refusal to fight. Moore, due to his silence, is initially forced to resign as chancellor and is ultimately destroyed due to his refusal to support the divorce and remarriage of Henry VIII. It is impossible for me to do this great film justice in the very short time that I'm going to discuss it, so I'm just going to leave off with the voiceover narration that ends the film. We are told that Thomas Cromwell was beheaded 5 years after Moore was, Archbishop Cranmer was burned at the stake, the Duke of Norfolk was slated for execution, but the king died of syphilis the night before the order was scheduled to be signed, and finally, that Richard Rich became Lord Chancellor of England and died in his bed. Just as in Craven's film, the world dominated by alpha males is a world that offers nothing positive and no real reward to anyone who plays by its rules. as demonstrated by the final comment about Rich, the least likable character in the film. Only the most ruthless of characters can survive in this world, which is not only without a moral center or conscience, but will actively destroy anyone who does demonstrate that they have a moral center or conscience. Much of the literature on workplace bullying and office psychopaths tells us that bullies often choose their targets because their targets are morally superior to them and have a conscience. The bully in some way intuits the superiority of their target and must destroy their target in order to assuage the feelings of inferiority that their target engenders in them. A Man for All Seasons examines the process of the destruction of a man of morality and conscience brought about by the power-seeking behavior of other men that he is surrounded with. It also contains some of the richest language and some of the finest performances that have ever been committed to film. There is no other way for me to do this film justice than to recommend that you watch it.